Up. Well, this is being done in Matthew, the 5th chapter. I'm going to read verses 38 down through verse 42, 38 through 42 of Matthew, the 5th chapter. It says, "Ye have heard that it has been said, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. Whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow thee, turn not away." You look at that and you see that there's much to be said that really doesn't sound much like our society today, does it? Today you look and you find that as Jesus addresses this, and again in the Sermon on the Mount, what he's doing is he's taking the common teachings of that day and he's giving a correct statement regarding what they are perverting. And that's sadly the way many things go today, is people look and they just simply distort God's Word. And this is one of the common ones. You know, the idea that an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. It's kind of like whenever you look at society and you see how they've perverted so many other things, that they look and says, God tells me that I can get even with you. And that's kind of the mantra that I see so many people have. I remember growing up that it was commonplace to see people who said, you know, I don't get mad, I get even. And that was, you know, a real popular saying, if you want to be macho. But does that have anything to do with what God says? Is that the attitude we're to have? You know, you see all sorts of battles that have gone on in the eyes of people as they have fought and fought to maintain their right, their honor, this and this. But God looks at things quite a bit different as you look at this. You look and you find the Jewish misconception in verse 38. You have heard that it has been said. And generally what he's doing is he's taken what the prominent speakers in those days, the prominent Jewish leaders, would teach you. And that was the idea then, and it's the idea today. I've told you before, those Jews of old, and in fact, those who profess to be Jews today, really don't care much about what the Old Testament says. What they care about is their interpretations of traditions that have been handed down. And today, the most common place you can find that is the Babylonian Talmud. In other words, here's what they say God's Word teaches. But it's very obvious that Jesus in his day, whenever he was speaking to them, said, you better watch out about listening to that. You better realize what is really being taught in such passages. So you look at that, and the statement, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, it's found 3 different times in God's Word. In Exodus, the 21st chapter, verses 24 and 25, Leviticus, the 24th chapter, and verse 20, and Deuteronomy, the 19th chapter. But if you look at each one of those, you find that it is not, as they would have had you to believe, a personal vendetta. You know, you come and you do something to me, I'm going to do more back to you. But what it does, let me give you just a couple examples from that. In the book of Exodus, the 21st chapter, in verse 22, he says, if men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit departeth from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall surely be punished, according to the woman's husband, as the woman's husband lays upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. And then in the verses before and after, it says the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But you look at that, and you find that it is not, okay, you do something, and I'm going to get you back. It is something as the judges determine. It is a legal proceeding. It's not a personal vendetta at all. But it is something using today. We have Romans, the 13th chapter. You are to be subject, I'm to be subject to the powers that be. They're ordained of God. In other words, there is a legal redress in order to deal with matters. That keeps order in society. If every person goes about doing what they wish, they desire, I'm going to get my way, you have a parallel with what happened in the book of Judges, whenever great wickedness prevailed because there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And if that's the life I live, then I'm going to be promoting, setting forth the anarchy that simply goes on in society today. You know, why do you think we have all of these drive-by shootings? The people who, you mess with their gang, they're going to mess with your gang, and they go back and forth. it's because of a personal redress instead of simply applying the matters to legal means as God has given us. Now, one of the problems, of course, is even in the legal field, there are people who get to seek their own. But God's desire, of course, is that government be such that we can, as Paul prayed, live a godly life in all honesty. But here, it's clear that this is such that it is as the judges determine. It's not, you do something and you bring harm to my wife and child, I'm going to get you. It's not personal in a retribution. But there are the means in which it is to be addressed. And then in Deuteronomy, the 19th chapter, in verses 15 through 19, he says, now one witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity, for if any sin that he sinneth, at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall the matter be established. If a false witness arise up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong, then both the men between whom the controversy is shall stand before the Lord, before the priest and the judges, which shall be in those days. The judges shall make diligent inquisition, and behold, if the witness be a false witness, and hath testified falsely against his brother, then shall ye do unto him as he hath been done unto his brother. So shall he put away evil among you. But there again, it's brought before the powers that be. It's brought before the priest and the judges. There is a system in which to deal with it instead of every person going around. And thankfully they didn't have guns in that day. But today the system is, you do that to me, you talked against me, I'm coming against you. And today it's the shooting, just the other day. I don't know what the circumstances were, but I heard a man on I-29, they found him over off the road, he'd been shot. Well, maybe he had just pulled in front of somebody, or somebody had perceived some slight or wrong. Well, the person then, whoever it would be, is not uncommon that they begin to either have road rage or they will pull out a gun and shoot at somebody. And most of them, whenever that occurs, if they are found, are horrified that they've done that. But if they'd had in their mind and heart that this is not what this is speaking of, we do not live in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth society unless you're talking about an equity under legal means. That's what was then, and that's what God desires today. As a matter of fact, if you look further in the Old Testament, you find the very idea of a personal vendetta, a personal redress on these things. In Leviticus, the 19th chapter, in verse 18, he says, thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Proverbs, the 20th chapter, verse 22, say not thou, I will recompense evil, but wait on the Lord, and he shall save thee. Proverbs, the 24th chapter, verse 28 and 29, be not a witness against a neighbor without cause, and deceive not with your lips. In other words, I'm not going to shoot you, but I'm going to tear you up. Today it would be, you've heard of the bullying online? That'd be really what that's talking about, that type of attitude. I'm not going to touch you physically, but I'm going to destroy you. And so don't do that. Say not, I will do so unto him as he had done to me. I will render the man according to his work. Don't do that. That's not who anyone following God would ever conceive of. You have to pull God out of your life in order to have that personal vendetta idea. But the Jews gladly did that in that day. And then in the New Testament, Romans the 12th chapter, verse 17 through 19, he says, recompense no man evil for evil, provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Now there, of course, we realize if it is possible, we live at peace with others. But peace takes two. But I am to be the one who, if there is this problem between us, that I'm not the one who's going to carry it on. I'm willing to deal with that, take it out of the way in a proper fashion. If not, I'm not going to get even. I'm going to leave it up to the Lord. You've heard people say, well, I just can't do anything about it, but the Lord's going to take care of it. You go over to the book of 2 Thessalonians and you find the Apostle Paul talks about that you are not to get vengeance. They were being persecuted. And he tells them that God's going to take care of it. I don't have to get even. I look, and as a matter of fact, my goal would be to help that person to realize they're wrong and to come to a knowledge of the Lord, obedience to Him, and bring their life into accord with it. But if they don't, I don't have to deal with it here. I don't have to get down and wallow with the pigs in order to have my life the way I want it, because that's not where I want to live. I don't stoop down to their level. And so he says, vengeance is mine. In 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 15, see that none render evil for evil unto any man, but ever follow that which is good, both among yourselves and to all men. In 1 Peter 3 and verse 9, not rendering evil for evil, railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing. Know that you're thereunto called, that you should inherit a blessing. In other words, I'm here. Altercations are attempted on the part of many people, but I'm not going to get down to that. I'm not going to get down to where it's a screaming match. Who can scream the loudest? Who can make the biggest accusation? And then finally, who can throw the first punch? That's not who we are. Our desire isn't retribution. It isn't self-exaltation, on this world. I've got a blessing before me. That's where my hope is. And that's why the Lord, He says, you don't fear the people that can destroy the body. You fear, you reverence, you stand in awe of the God who can destroy both body and soul. I look, and my focus is somewhere else if I am a follower of God. So then in verse 39 through 42, he goes on and he talks about the fact of the righteous truth. Here is what is right, here's what is proper. Beginning in verse 39, he tells them, turn the other cheek. Now, the idea of vengeance, resist not evil, is condemned. In other words, I'll tell you, if somebody smites you on the right cheek, duck. It's not the idea, here is something that is given simply, I'm not going to trade blow for blow. But if somebody does that, get out of the situation. Seek to de-escalate instead of taking it on. This isn't the idea. And here's a strange thing. We profess to be followers of God. We profess to know the truth that can make us free. We profess to have the same focus, the same goal as our Lord who came to seek and save the lost. Thus we strive to fulfill the great commandment, that is to go and teach all nations. We strive to live in such a way that people can see us as an example to follow, 1 Corinthians 11 verse 1. And we know that to pervert that word is to pervert the means, the basis of having that faith. The gospel that is the power of God unto salvation, Romans 1 and verse 16. Yet how many people do you know who say, I'm going to tell you what, you mess with me, you're going to be in trouble. You call me that, we're going to go round. But by the way, you speak against God's word, well, I don't believe in fighting over religion. What's wrong with people? The fact is, this isn't denying that we do have to take a stand. But the stand that God puts out over and over, James 4, you resist the devil. How do you do that? Well, the Apostle Paul spoke about his life, Philippians the 1st chapter, in verse 7. They know I'm set for the defense of the gospel. In verse 27, he says, I want to hear about you, that you're striving together for the faith of the gospel. Whenever Jude saw that there were those who crept in unawares, who came in by a side door, and they started to spread their pernicious lies, he said, you need to be set for the defense of the gospel. You see, we fight, not a physical fight. Weapons of our warfare aren't carnal. That includes the fist. But it is a spiritual battle we're in. How many of us, I look and I see people who, I can do this, I can do that. Can I do this? Stand up and be ready to give an answer, 1 Peter 3 and verse 15. Can I hold this up? And people say, well, this, and this. Well, have you not read and go over here where the scriptures are? If we train our young people to stand up for God as much as we talk about in a society standing up for self, imagine what it would be. I look at Paul in Philippians, the first chapter. Those individuals knew he was set for the defense of the gospel. Is that what they know about you and I? You see, that's the fight we're in. That's the battle we're in. But people look and they're so enamored with the self aspect that they will instead go about and they will take a fight for physical means, but will not take that same stand for the gospel. Brethren, there's something backwards in that. That which pertains to eternal life, for self, for family, for friends, for the whole world. But I won't fight for that. And the fight is not easy. I can tell you it's a whole lot easier to punch somebody right in the nose or the throat than it is to stand up and defend, proclaim the Word of God. It's a much harsher battle in one sense, but it's one that we enter into knowing that God doesn't look and say, you don't have to do that. You don't have to get into physical vengeance realm, but you do have to get into the spiritual one. There is that connotation in there that people look and they realize, sadly, if they look at it very long, that if I don't fight about religion, I don't think that's right. You just condemn Jesus in John the 2nd chapter. You know, he went in too, and he cast over the tables. He threw those things down. He said, who are you? You making merchandise in my Father's house. And he threw the tables over and he ran those people out with a scourge. Well, you look, if you're going to fight, number one, I'm not Jesus, so I'm not picking up a scourge against somebody. But if I'm going to stand and be known that I'm set for the fight, it's going to be the fight for the gospel of Christ. If I'm set for the defense and people say, well, you don't mess with Jack because he'll rip your head off, I've failed. I don't want that known of me. And so you look and he sets it out. Now, one of the reasons I think that this problem comes up is we are too sensitive, too easily offended. You know, you're going to say something to me. You call me what? And then again, the flip side is you can deny the Lord and I won't say a word. You can deny the truth of his church. I won't say a word. You can pervert the truth about God's family, about the physical family, about what he teaches society to live. I won't say a word. But we are so sensitive about what people think of self that we're ready to fight. And that's what Jesus was combating. We look at that and we see that whenever there are things that happen to us, there are really about three things that we could do, that we could consider as we dealt with them. First of all, we can just hit back. Don't get mad, get even. Or I could run, show fear. Well, there are physical instances which I'd encourage you, run. You know, I used to have people tell me all the time, well, you need to carry a gun. No, I don't. The only way a gun's going to help me is if I can shoot accurately over my shoulder while I'm running full blast. And that ain't going to happen. But the reality is, that's not what I want to do. I don't have a problem with turning around. I've been called a coward. I've been called all sorts of names because people they're up and they're going to hit me and they spit on you, whatever, and they're going to get you to fight. And I don't fight. Well, there are ways to handle it, ways to do it, but sometimes turning and walking away is it. But you look and, you know, the idea of showing fear, physically, I'm afraid. You know, I tell my kids, you can do a lot of things to me, don't hit me in the nose. That hurts. But fear, I don't want to be hit. I'm not afraid in one sense, but if people are going to call me a coward, call away. That doesn't hurt me. But the other thing I can do is stand my ground. I can take the insult, I can suffer wrong, but not do wrong. You see, I'm not going to give evil for evil. And so I'm going to look for a way out, but I'm not going to change my character in order to survive that thing. I'm going to look and I'm going to strive to show what godliness is in this life. Jesus and Paul illustrated that principle. In John 18, the Lord said that one of the officers which stood by struck him with the palm of his hand, saying, "Answerest thou the high priest so?" And Jesus answered him, "If I spoke in evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why did you smite me?" I mean, one of the things that, instead of learning to hit, maybe we need to learn to talk. Maybe we need to learn to reason with people. And there are some people who simply will not reason, so you exit the scene. But then Paul, in Acts the 23rd chapter, the high priest Ananias commanded them, stood him by him to smite him on the mouth. And Paul said unto him, "God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. Why sittest thou to judge me after the law? Commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law." In other words, again, the idea of trying to de-escalate, to take care of the situation without the physical retribution, not taking a stand for self, but taking a stand that's right. And that's not always easy. I remember growing up, my father would talk to me at times, and I sadly got into a few little foolish skirmishes. And he'd say, "Son, did you try and talk your way out of it?" What? And I thought, is that what you're supposed to do? And he taught me, yeah. You try to get out of there. Don't escalate. Don't partake in it. Don't get your feelings hurt. Don't be thin-skinned. Somebody going to call you a name? Fine. That doesn't hurt me. You know that old saying, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words never hurt you. We know the words hurt, but they're not get overable. You look and you find, again, what am I so upset about? Am I upset about what people say to me or what they say about the Lord? And it puts things in perspective. And it helps me to understand how I can deal with those individuals. And then he talks about in verse 40, if a man will sue thee at the law and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. Now, there you think about it, we'll give him the shirt off your back. Now, if you go to verse 40, notice that word, sue. If somebody's going to come in and they're going to sue you at the law, take away your coat, you can look and you can find that that's a judicial injustice. As a matter of fact, if you look and you find the coat in Exodus 22nd chapter in verse 26 and 27 is the inner garment. The outer garment was the cloak that came over. And in that day, people would oftentimes use it. They would lay it down for a bed. So now you have your inner covering, and then the cloak is that which you would lay down upon. And he says, they sue you for that, give them the cloak also. In other words, what is it that you are protecting? What is it that you're going after? And he says, now, why not rather take wrong, suffer yourselves to be defrauded? And then so instead of being ruled, again, by a spirit of vengeance, you took this, and it wasn't right. You treated me wrong. So what am I going to do? Don't get mad. Get even. No. He says, don't let that control your life. Too many times we let the things in life, we are to be on a higher plane. We are to be the people who rise above the things of the world. The lust of flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Nobody's going to do that to me. I'm to rise above that idea. And that means at times the world will look, and they will look at us as somebody who is weak, who is just not able. But what they don't know is, no, I'm not able to come down to your level. I'm willing to sacrifice in order to live above the spirit of vengeance and suffering all of the consequences and such. In the book of Hebrews, the 10th chapter, in verse 32 and 34, he says, recall the former days in which after you were illuminated, you endured a great struggle with sufferings, partly while you were made a spectacle, both by reproaches, tribulations, partly while you became companions of those who were so treated. For you had compassion on me in my chains, joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have a better and enduring possession for yourselves in heaven. In other words, you think about Paul. I had one man tell me once, it says where Paul was forsaken. Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. And I had one man say, do you realize what Demas was facing? If he went and he stayed with Paul, He was going to be persecuted because he was a companion of Paul. He was there. Whenever Jesus was in the garden and he was taken, his disciples fled. Peter said, "Oh, I'll not flee. I'll not deny you." But all of them did. Why? Because they knew what it was to stand with that person. Well, the Hebrew writer tells us you can be different. You did that. He says, whenever I was in that affliction, you suffered for it. And you took it willfully. You preferred rather to be the person you should to me and suffer than to disregard and reject me and keep your belongings, your things, your pride, your whatever it may be. You see, living as a Christian isn't taking the easy way. That's the broad way that leads to destruction. That I take the path of least resistance. Living as a Christian is taking a path that has a great deal of resistance in it. And you find in the first century, there were those that the Jewish people in particular, that and the next thing mentioned, were oftentimes mistreated that way. The Roman rulers would take advantage of them, take their belonging and such, and that's what he addressed. And then in verse 41, whosoever should compel thee to go 1 mile, go with him twain. They send the messages. The Romans could send a message, and they might come, and they choose you and say, okay, I want you to take this. I want you to go here. Well, people get up and say, no, I don't want to serve you. He says, here's what you do. Go to. You know, it's not fair. No. You can ask my son. I never had to tell my daughter. She's a sweet little thing. But my son, he'd always, Dad, that's not fair. I said, who lied to you? I never told you life was fair. Nobody's going to tell you that. Life is filled with unfairness, but it cannot mold your character. And so whenever the Jews were compelled to go 1 mile to look, the ones around them, they might say, I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to do your work. Here, let me take it to the next stop also. Let me carry on. You see, I'm not going to mold my character to yours in order to preserve my face. And then Jesus looks at that and he says, okay, here's what you do. You choose the better thing. Now, personal retaliation, if you think about that, again, in Romans the 12th chapter, and this is akin to what we've seen before, but in Romans 12, go on down, and he says in verse 17 and following, repay no man evil for evil, have regard for good things in the sight of all men. He says, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, be at peace with all men. But he talks about whenever we do that, you know, that if your enemy's hungry and such as that, you feed him, you give him these things. And he said, in so doing, you'll cast you'll heap coals of fire upon his head. You look at that, and you find the last phrase of it, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil by good. You see, that's my weapon. I can't be overcome by evil. You look and you see the world, and I tell people this all the time. You see all the terrible things in the world. I can either be part of it, or I can be an influence against it. That's my choice. Just like we spoke of this morning, who I am is a matter of choice. I can surround myself with people who know what it is to go through that. You know, you can look, you can find, well, I've been mistreated. Let me give you some emails, some messages from other parts of the world if you want to see what mistreated is. But here, we get upset about so many little things. But it really doesn't matter how big it is. Don't be overcome of evil. In other words, remember that we are that light. You say, well, I can't make a difference in the world. We could turn off all the lights in this room, shut off all of the windows, shut off all the doors where it's completely dark, and I could get a little match and hold it up. And you know where that match is going to be seen? Throughout this room. I've read books that says whenever you're out, say you're out in a campsite or something, and you look over and you see a campfire away, you can see one up to 5 miles away. You see, that light makes a difference. I can be part of the darkness, or I can be that spark of light that, number one, I am doing what's right in the sight of God for myself. but I'm also now the influence for others to do that right. You know, you look again, and the idea is, if I'm going to deal with it properly. So in Acts 16, you know, you go and you appeal to the powers that be, but you say, well, that doesn't work. Our judicial system is bad. Well, I can't control that. But I can still do what's right, no matter whether it's the individual, the judicial system, the whole of society. I'm not going to be part of it. And that's what he is teaching us. And then he goes in verse 42, he says, give unto him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn thou not away. You look and you think, okay, that means every time I see somebody that says, want money, I need to stop, give them what I got. No, there are limitations. You look in the book of Galatians, the 6th chapter, in verse 10. As you have therefore opportunity, do good unto all men, especially those household of faith. You know what that means? Is I have opportunity. You see, I've got a little bit of money like everybody else. Do I have to give it away every time I see somebody? No, because I've got responsibilities myself to my family, my wife. I've got responsibilities that are here in my life, and so I may not have that opportunity because it is coupled with my ability with the need that is there. And so there are occasions when I can't. I'd love to feed the whole world. I don't have the ability to do that. The need is there for a lot of people, but I don't have the ability in all of those things. But even then, I look further and I find, okay, 2 John 9 through 11. You know, I'm not going to help a drug addict get more drugs. You know, I want money. I had a man once tell me it's not my responsibility to figure out what they're going to do with the money. I just give it to them. That's as far as I go. That's wrong. If I know, you know, somebody's standing out on the corner and they've got the hollow cheeks, their teeth are rotted away because they've been on meth all these times, or they got the tracks up their arms, I need money for food. No, I know what you need money for. You've shown it by your lifestyle. And there are people all over that deal with those individuals that tell you the worst thing you can do is give them money. You know, if you want to help them, you help them through a means in which they do not have availability to cash to go out on Independence Avenue and buy drugs. You give them the means where they can get true help. There was a city in California that illustrated this. There was the homeless population that was there. And they passed a law and said, you cannot be in this city if you are homeless unless you come to the city. We will put you, if you're on drugs, alcohol, whatever it may be, we're going to put you in a rehab program. Otherwise, we're going to put you in a program where you will work and earn your way. The time that I read the article, and I don't know what happened after that, but they were inundated with homeless people. By the time I read that article, there was one homeless person in that town. They left. How many times do you see people who are ungodly? And I'm not going to have fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. I'm not going to partake of their sin as John speaks of. So I'm not going to give to somebody and say, well, it doesn't matter what they use it for. I'm going to be charitable. No, that's not charitable. That's promoting evil. So I look, and yes, just like people come here, we have deacons who will examine, who will look, who will try these things. Say, okay, first thing we're going to do, we're going to take your driver's license, we're going to look up, we're going to see if you got any warrants out. We're going to see if you have a case against you on the case net. We're going to talk to you about these things. We're going to look up some references. The majority of those people walk right out that door. They don't want any part of examination. They want money. And they'll try and prey on us and say, you know, you are to give. No, I'm to be a good steward, and God gives these things. Second, you know, Galatians 6, verse 10, I need to consider myself. Whether it be a spiritual matter, I consider myself, or whether I might be tempted to. I'm not going to get involved with those things. And then, as I have opportunity, I'm going to do good. I don't always have the opportunity to do that, to fulfill every need around. And in 2 John 9 through 11, I'm not going to engage in those evil things. And in 2 Thessalonians 3:10, if you're not going to try and help yourself, I can't help you. You know, to him that will not work, neither should he eat. You know, you offer here in Independence. Another example of that. They had a program, probably still going, in which you could go. You say, okay, I need work. I need money. I lost my job. I had sheets of paper that I'd carry around in my car, and I would hand it to these people. You go to work for the City of Independence, you go up there, they will put you on a crew, you go out, you pick up trash, you get $12 an hour. You have another $3 an hour put in an escrow account that's going to help you. If you go so long, there will be several $100s added to that to help provide housing. You know what happened to everyone that I saw? I handed it to them and I watched them as I drove away. They'd look at it, wad it up, throw it away. But they had a sign that says, "We'll work for money." No. You see, if somebody's not going to work, if somebody's not going to help themselves, you can't help them. You can exhort them, encourage them, try to help them to realize their need, but I'm not going to give them the ability to go about and be that type of person who will not work, who is like a busybody going around, expects everybody else to support them. That doesn't work. Didn't work in God's day, won't work in ours. It only brings problems. And so there are these things. We ought to be a generous people, helping those truly in need, and this congregation is. There's much work that's done in the area of benevolence, that quite a bit of it. All of the members don't know particularly what is going on. We don't always broadcast the needs that are there and the needs that are provided, but this congregation is known as one that will help those who are in need and are, as the scriptures would point out, rightfully to be helped. Sometimes we get into the idea, though, about what's it going to do for me. In the book of Luke, the 6th chapter, it talks about, that you can lend hoping for something in return. That's not it. True benevolence is looking and seeing the needs that are before you and helping those needs without expectation of a return. It's truly a beneficent act in trying to help and assist and help those up. So you look at that, and the idea of an eye for an eye, and if they, once you coach, you take it. No. I'm a different kind of person. I'm focused on what the Lord was. One of the amazing statements of Jesus made is in the book of Acts, the 10th chapter. And I think this would be good to think about the things that we do in life. I oftentimes think about it myself and looking at me. And whenever the household of Cornelius had Jesus preached unto them, what was said was, he told them about Jesus who went about doing good. Pretty good. Let your light so shine before men that they can glorify your Father which is in heaven. Why do you do that good? Why do you help worthy causes? Why is it that you don't engage in retribution? You don't get there and get all fussed up about you're going to stand for self, but let the things of God go by. Why is it you're that type of person? Because I'm a Christian. And then I'm ready to fight the good fight of faith as I take up the sword of the Spirit, not necessarily in defense or offense at that point, but to give a reason for the hope that I have, that I want the world to have. I want them to see that we're different. You think about society, as I said, the way it is. People are afraid at times to get out of the house because of people who are ungodly, who are living the life that Jesus condemned in these passages. We don't have to be those people. We need to be those who mirror the life of Christ. If we can help you to make that decision, first of all, to become a child of God, to realize that that old man of sin that lived away, this world is filled with those people around. You don't have to be that way. That old man of sin can be put to death, and you rise to walk in the newness of life, as spoken of in Romans the 6th chapter. That happens whenever you're baptized into Christ, into his death. If we can help you to make that decision and return to it, to have that trust and that focus upon God, we want to help you to do that as we stand and sing the song of invitation.
Oh, Lord, cut down his sorrow.